Okay. Hello, everybody. Kimberly King here. Tonight is the first meeting for our book club. We have a lot of people planning to join, but with time zones and schedules, I am just going to record this. And if people enter, we have one person already entered, but if people enter along the way, I will admit them. And we are going to do just like a simple format of reviewing a few chapters at a time, and then we'll have question and answer discussions. If you are not comfortable asking your questions in person, you can always email me your questions at kimberlykingbooks@gmail.com. So just some housekeeping items. This is a safe space. We're not going to tolerate any kind of swearing or inappropriate language or any kind of hate nonsense. That's not why we're here. If that happens, you'll be kicked out immediately. I will be sharing this with the people who have signed up for the book club and might be posting this on my website. So keep your cameras off for today if you don't want your face to be shared. And then next week I'll set this up correctly so that we have, all of the participants just on a speaker only view. So that being said, I'm going to start. So again, my name is Kimberly King. I am the author of this book, I Said No, A Kid to Kid Guide to Keeping Private Parts Private, and the book that you're here about, the Body Safety for Young Children book. These two books kind of go hand in hand. One is for the adults and teachers, the other is for the children. However, the I Said No book is being republished with a new publisher in August. So you will have an entirely fresh new resource that goes perfectly with this new book. Very similar in content, but it's shifting from a guide to a narrative. So that's what's happening with that. And let's just start with the why I wrote this book for adults. So I've been a body safety educator for, I guess, about 20 years. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. My child had an incident at a sleepover, and I have always just sort of been involved with sexual abuse prevention or human sexuality or peer education, those topics. And I am a kindergarten teacher, like on the side, although I've retired now. So I've always been very interested and passionate in the topic. And I realized through all the work that I did that there was no book that would really help parents sort of break this down. So giving that the I Said No book to the world, although it's an incredible gift and it's a prevention tool, it kind of puts the prevention focus on the child. And in reality, sexual abuse prevention is an adult responsibility. So I figured, wow, why don't I just write that book for adults, the book that I needed when I was a mom, or the book that I needed as a teacher. So I went about writing the book based on what I thought everybody needed to keep their kids safe. So in chapter 1, the first chapter, which some of you might have read, and these are short chapters, so just going to do a little synapse, and then we'll have a discussion with Q&A after. So the first chapter, chapter 1, Not the Man in the White Van, that is really kind of a little background about that. I was always one of these parents who was terrified that my kids would be kidnapped out of the window. I have memories of hearing about Elizabeth Smart and her case about how she was taken from her home and kept captive and abused, like all of that. That sort of made me very paranoid. And also the things that I had experienced as a young adult and then as a teacher, all of the um, disclosures that I received through the years. It is a topic that has always scared me, but my focus was more on, that kidnapper, that stranger, until something happened with my son at a sleepover, when I really started digging into the research and found that, in fact, that is definitely not where the biggest risk is. The biggest risk is with the people we know, the people that are our friends, our trusted adults, our pillars of the community. teachers, policemen, it can be anybody. It's not a particular person, and it's definitely not a stranger. The people that abuse children look just like you and me. So that's what I wanted to really start with, is debunking some of those myths. And if you have the book, I went into some of the fabulously false myths that really stick out to me. And I won't read them all, but like a few of them that are like really worth noting is that in my book, I said no, and I'm updating it. Like I said, I have a page where I talk about safe adults, and I say, even in this book, I wrote it back in 2008, and it was updated a few times, but I have a page where it says, who are the safe adults in your life? Who are the people that make you feel, safe, that you could call an emergency, that would help you? But I also say, like teachers, or like, and I give examples of particular people. So that one I'm updating in the new I Said No book, and I have clarified that here, is that being a safe adult, what that means to me and what I hope it means to your children that you work with, or your actual children, is that you're going to figure out who that safe adult is based on that person's behavior. So a safe adult is going to be somebody you trust in an emergency, that your child trusts in an emergency, that your child is okay with talking about tough topics and really feels safe and welcome with that person. That person also is a person who would never break a body safety rule and would never ask a child to keep a secret, especially about body safety. So I've clarified that a lot here. That's probably one of the most important myths about the safe adults, is that you just really have to base it on their behavior. So all teachers are definitely not safe adults. Another thing that I really want to focus on in all of this is the risk of child-to-child sexual abuse. That number has almost doubled in the past 5 years, and we can get into the reasons why that has increased later, but that's something really worth noting, because in that space, prevention is so much easier, because you can actually train your children on all of these body safety strategies to be able to identify when they feel unsafe and tell a safe adult before anything happens. So that's really an important thing, knowing that statistic, and then changing how you do things, like how you do play dates, how you do sleepovers, if you do sleepovers, that type of thing. And then like, how much supervision does your child have when they're at somebody's house, when they're at camp, when they're with a babysitter, all of those things. So the 14 myths were most of the common myths that people have. And then that other 10%, and that's a little bit different. So preventing child sexual abuse is one thing, and then stranger danger is another. So while you have to do both, just be aware that they're kind of like two separate topics typically. So body safety is one topic and stranger danger is another. Stranger danger is also happening online now, so that's almost a third topic. So we've got lots to talk about. And on chapter, so that would be like just a quick DL on the first chapter of things I wanted to stress. Does anybody have any questions about that chapter 1, about the myths yet, or the 14 fabulously false misconceptions? And
So,
if you go ahead.
yeah, Kim, I was going to ask you, is there something about sort of psychology? I assume that somebody that abuses a child is somehow psychologically warped, I suppose. And so behavior is one thing, sort of
Yeah.
trying to identify someone by behavior, but is there something we can do to identify people based on, I don't know, psychology, like somehow
Yeah,
understanding the psyche of the individual?
like a profile of somebody. I think that typically happens like after they've, caught a predator. And one thing that we find in the research is that people who abuse children are typically men, and they are
Yeah.
typically heterosexual men. Sometimes they are men with children, sometimes they are married men. And there is now also an association with an interest in children being associated with addictions to pornography as well.
Okay.
And Kristen Jensen, who is an author on that topic, has a ton of data and research on that as to like, what causes a person to go down that path. But typically, it is very hard to predict, who that person is until after the fact, like when you actually figure it out and you're like, oh, well, yeah, there were the signs. That's why understanding the grooming behaviors is really important, like as a preventative focus. So, but yeah, that's a good question. And I can probably get, some actual statistics and psychological research from, I have a friend who's a forensic interviewer, and
Okay.
she collects that data all day long. So I can get like specifics for you and email them to you for sure if you're
Okay.
interested. But that's a really good question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned sibling abuse. I never thought about that. It wasn't on my radar, I suppose. Maybe subconsciously I'm assuming
Yeah.
that one sibling would not sexually abuse another sibling. But as I say that, I realize how naive that sounds.
Well, yeah.
So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah.
Are the reasons for a sibling to do that the same as the reason somebody else might have?
So I don't, that's a really good question too. And I'm in the middle of reading two memoirs on that topic. So it seems that sibling sexual abuse is the most common form of harm to children, but
Okay.
it's very misunderstood and so taboo that most people don't ever report it because the parents have to worry about the victim, but also the perpetrator, who is usually, they're related.
Yeah.
So I think with that, just like with any child that you're trying to protect and keep safe, there are things you can put in place that will nip that in the bud. And one of them is teaching body safety. So like teaching your kids the names of the body parts, teaching about body boundaries, starting to model consent and consent-based language and doing all those things, but then also putting some stops in place. I have a couple of parents I've worked with who had a problem with that. And it was, just some inappropriate touching. And then the child was asking, or telling the younger girl in the situation to like not tell mom, and started doing some blackmailing even. And
Okay.
so through the investigation of figuring out what was happening and the conversations that were happening, the mom found out that her son was actually being touched inappropriately by a friend. So it was kind of being repeated at home, um, on the sister. So there is a fine line between
Mm.
curiosity and just normal curiosity and questions that kids have, but then verging on to the harm and the sexual abuse, it's a totally different topic. So one thing that parents can do after they do all this education and talking and monitoring and supervising is just have some rules, like, keep your doors when you're playing in your bedrooms, keep your doors open. Or, if you're going to bed, you stay in your bed, and like setting rules so that those types of things don't happen, and checking in on the kids and supervising and monitoring. And then if something minor happens that is like borderline, it's the perfect time to really get in on talking about, okay, what's happening here? Why is this an unsafe behavior? What are the body safety rules? And really digging in deep on that as a family. It's a really serious problem though. And there's two books I want to recommend.
Okay.
If you want to really understand how that happens in a home under the radar without the parents even knowing. There is a book called Everyone Was Silent by Diane Tarantini. That's for sale on Amazon, and it is her story of sibling sexual abuse at the hands of her brother. And it's horrific and it's surprising, and just the disregard that her parents had and the things that were missed along the way. So now that we know that it happens, there are many steps we can take to prevent it, which I think is so important. So I always say to parents that I work with, we know more now so we can do more. And,
Yeah.
You can do so much to prevent child sexual abuse. So I hope that answered
Yeah.
your question
Yeah,
somewhat.
yeah. Did you say you had two recommendations for books? One
Oh
was
yes, the first one is Diane Tarantini, Everyone Was Silent. And
okay.
then there is a new book coming out very soon called I Feel So Guilty by Jane Epstein. That one's in pre-order right now, but I'm reading it sort of behind the scenes and doing a book review, and it's incredible. So
Okay.
these survivor stories and these memoirs are really a unique way to get the insight from a survivor on how that happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have more questions, but I don't want to interrupt your flow
No,
too
that's
much.
okay. That's okay. I'm gonna just go to chapter 2 and wanted to talk a little bit about grooming and what the red flags are. So I talk about this in relation to schools, but are you interested in grooming behaviors as a parent or at school or at like what would you rather me focus on?
I would say, I have a 7-year-old who goes to school, so
Okay.
I'm very interested in what happens at school.
Yeah, okay. So that's what most people are wanting to know. So for school, when you're thinking about somebody who might be grooming your child, if it's an adult, to have a successful target to groom, you have to have a child who is uneducated, that doesn't know things, because children who
Okay.
know things tell. So if you have a child who knows about body safety, knows the private part rules, knows their boundaries, knows they're safe adults, and knows it's never their fault if anything happens, and they can always tell you, that's a bad target. So number one would be like really pump up the body safety education for your child. But then when we get to the grooming behaviors of adults, this type of abuse can only happen with the time and the opportunity. So if your child is never alone with another adult at school, then it cannot happen. So things that are risky when you talk about grooming at school would be like a teacher paying special attention to your child, taking a unique interest in your child, trying to become a friend of the family, trying to
Yeah.
offer like babysitting services to the family because they just think your child is so adorable and they want to give you a mom's night out or a dad's night out.
Yeah.
Um, Offering free tutoring, offering free lessons, offering anything for free, presenting themselves as your child's friend, or their special friend, and just trying to develop this sort of extra relationship with your child that they don't have with other students, that seems to be a little bit over the top. And then also one thing with grooming, some of the beginning steps of grooming, teachers, anybody really, anybody that's grooming a child can use these strategies of like a testing secret. So
Yeah.
let's just say your teacher, for some reason, I don't know, brought your child an extra piece of candy, or said, oh, let's go get ice cream after lunch or something like that. And let's keep it a secret. Whenever a teacher or any adult that cares for your child asks them to keep a secret from you, that is like a huge red flag. They do those testing secrets just to see if your child will keep a secret. And if they
Right.
do, then they can take it, a step farther and a step farther until your child could be in a situation. Yeah. So, and the other
Okay.
thing is at school, it's always good to ask for that ratio. Like you never want to have your child alone with another adult. So, even in situations where like let's just say there's a potty accident, right? You don't want to have a teacher going into a bathroom helping a child change. You don't want to have a teacher alone with one child ever. There always needs to be two adults to supervise to make sure that everything is on the up and up, everything is safe, and there are always observers, because with observers the sexual abuse cannot happen. So that's one of the most important rules at school, is just having that procedure where there is constant observation and one adult is never alone with one child.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. It's also
I
important. Oh, go ahead.
yes, go ahead.
I was going to say it's also important at school to make sure that children are never alone with each other. So you don't want to have two girls in the bathroom, playing doctor. You don't want to have, and that's relatively normal in the curious stage, but it's just better to prevent that because you don't want to have to deal with that. You don't want to have two kids in a playhouse where you can't see through the doors and you don't know what they're doing. You want to always have, safety in numbers, right? So that's another thing to think about because kids are now repeating things that they see online, on cartoons, on social
Yeah.
media, and all of that. And it comes to school. And half the
Okay.
time at age 7, they really don't know what they're doing. If they try to do something like that, half the time they just are repeating something they've seen or heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really interesting point about not even leaving the kids alone, two kids alone. Now, is that at all ages? At what age would it be overkill?
So kids do go to the bathroom like in middle school on their own in the bathroom together. And there's always trouble in the bathroom, but I focus on young children. So I'm talking
Okay.
about anybody that's under the age of 8 that I would want those kids to be highly supervised and monitored by always by two adults. And unless there is some type of an extreme emergency,
Yeah.
there's really no need. And it's not safe for the teacher to do that. Like when you leave two children alone in a room in the bathroom, all sorts of stuff happens in the bathroom. So I've been teaching for 14 years, and most of the problems with body safety at school between children happen in the bathroom.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. To your point about two adults being present all the time, at my child's school, I don't know, a weekly math class. And usually we have two people. It's me and another adult, another parent, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes the other parent's missing. And
Ah,
the first time that happened,
yeah,
I sort of felt uncomfortable being
yeah,
in the classroom with these 7 or 8 kids, between the ages of 6 and 5 and 7.
right.
Um, and I try to leave the door open, the
Yeah,
lights on. I sort of try to make it open and welcoming and
right.
visible, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I admit that I was a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, I felt that way too teaching at times when, when the other person doesn't show up or when your assistant isn't, is absent and you don't have a sub. And like you said, you just have to keep the door open and you're actually not alone with one child. So you're alone with 8 children.
Yeah,
And, just use your best practices to ensure that, there's no boundaries crossed and the doors are open. That's really the best you can do in that situation. And then,
yeah,
ask for another volunteer if you feel uncomfortable. But I mean, if you feel really uncomfortable, it's always okay to say, well, class is canceled
yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah.
Now, how realistic is it for schools to always enforce this policy of two adults in the
Yeah.
room with a child?
So
Because
it's
what I've seen is that it starts off that way in the morning,
yeah.
but the kids are running around. They're going from one class to another. There are different after school programs. Teachers are doing something else or what have
Hmm.
you. And very often, it's one child with one adult or one adult with maybe a group of kids.
Yeah. So and it's a best practice. So it's to protect the children and the teachers. So I would say like probably like at the schools I've taught, it would happen that we had two adults and with all the children most of the time. But when
Okay.
things are happening, like we're switching to music and we're in the hot, it things happen. You do find yourself alone with 10 students or alone with 3. But I think the biggest risk is to avoid that one-on-one exposure just in case. You never know.
Okay.
I have a friend who is a
Yeah.
teacher who helped a boy in the bathroom and she accidentally he couldn't zip his pants and she accidentally zipped too fast and things got stuck and he cried
Oh,
and then he
okay.
told the mom that the teacher hurt his penis
Yeah.
and then she was investigated by CPS and like it was a disaster. So these are the times when as it like and I'm a more experienced teacher now. I probably helped somebody pull up their pants when I was 23 years old. I wouldn't do it now. I would just say, well, you gotta take care of it yourself or wait for mom. Because that's, there are certain things in those
Yeah.
body boundaries that you just shouldn't go near. So, yeah,
Okay.
I hope that answers your question. And it's interesting. I just went to speak at the NACI conference in New Orleans, and I was talking about body safety and body safety books and curriculum and education and all of that. And there are laws passed in, I think, 34 states. Aaron's Law is a law that requires schools to teach body safety curriculum to young children, and body safety curriculum throughout K through 12. And most of the teachers I talked to said that their schools don't do it.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
it's very interesting. It's like often I think body safety and prevention is confused with sex education, and sometimes therefore like, woo, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
I get the
tough.
impression that it's an uncomfortable topic. And
Yeah.
so it's easier to avoid an uncomfortable topic as opposed to a comfortable topic.
Right, exactly. It is. It's definitely easier to avoid it. But, and then, you know, when I was done with my presentation, everybody was like, "Oh, well, that was easy. Like we can teach about hugs and body boundaries, and we can teach the rules. They're simple. There's nothing icky about it." So after people really start to understand like the very beginnings of body safety education, it just like their shoulders come down. They're like, "Oh, okay." They're confused. So I think that's one of the obstacles, is that people truly don't understand like how simple it can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
The other thing that comes to mind is I often find that when I propose something to someone at my child's school, the head of the school or what have you, they tend to listen, but they tend to not act on it.
yeah.
And it sort of gets just forgotten. I'll send an email, they'll say, okay, somebody will get back to you. And then nobody gets back to me.
Yeah.
So I get this impression that they're not really, and it's not just this school, other schools
Oh,
as
yeah.
well, where my child has been. There's sort of this mindset of this is how we do things, and this is likely how we'll continue doing things. And if you have new ideas to share or changes to propose, we're sort of not interested.
Yeah. And that's terrible, because I feel like parents really need to be partners in the education of their kids. And, even here in Connecticut, there are a couple of states that are, or a couple of towns here that are just over the top on like excluding parents from decision making.
Okay.
And yeah, it's I don't think that's right. I think parents have every right to be involved in their child's education and be really involved, like volunteer to read books, volunteer to help in the classroom, you know, volunteer to host a parent meeting. Also, there's so many ways parents can be involved. But you do have to be a little suspicious when a school doesn't want to learn about how to protect children. That's just a little strange to me. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And there's lots of curriculums for schools, like Darkness to Light has, so it's darknesstolight.org or d2l.org. They have a program called Stewards of Children, which I'm a facilitator for. So like I can go and train a school, I can go train teachers on this topic. It's a 2.5 hour research-based, trauma-informed continuing education credit course. And it's the simplest, calmest, most empowering course you're ever going to take. And schools can take it, get CEU credits, and get
Okay.
certified as a safe school. And I recommend that every school look at that, because it's for parents, teachers, everybody. And it's
Okay.
very, very friendly and not overwhelming at all. So,
Yeah. I remember
um,
taking one of the D2L courses or what have you. I forget, a webinar. It was not a, it was a
yeah.
seminar. It was an in-person seminar
Oh
in
yeah.
Austin a few years back. But I was the only person at the seminar.
Oh
So like
really?
I'm the only person at this book club
Oh, that's
today.
fun. That's all right. You're a trendsetter. And they have just like revamped their whole program. So
Okay.
it's so much more comforting and approachable the way that they've done it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I recommend looking at it. That's interesting. You're the only one. You're the only one on the conference. That's funny, because I went to one of their workshops too, and there were only like 3 people there when I went
Yeah.
in person. So that's why Zooms are nice, that we can record them and share them later.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely. Can I keep asking questions, or do you want me
yeah, go ahead.
to pause?
I've got 10 more minutes for questions, and then I'm gonna hopefully record the file and save it and prep for
Okay,
next week. Yeah, so go ahead.
okay. You said something very interesting earlier about the child will not necessarily tell you, right? Was that a chapter one or chapter two? I forget.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do with my child is I'm always asking her, how
Yeah.
was school? What happened at school? Did somebody touch you? Did they ask you to touch them?
Yeah.
Did they expose themselves? Did somebody touch you on your butt, on your chest? I'm asking
Yeah.
these like very explicit, direct questions.
Yeah.
I would say maybe a couple times a week, or sometimes more.
Yeah.
Is that the way to, is that a good approach?
Well, you can do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that unless your child starts to, I don't know, maybe act like they're annoyed or something. Because I did work with a mom who was like all in on body safety. She read the I Said No book every night for like a month. And she was every day like, did anybody touch you? And then
Yeah,
finally the girl was like, yes, somebody touched me. And so the mom freaked out, called the school. But it turned out that the girl was just saying what she thought her mom wanted her to hear,
got it, got
because
it.
she was like,
Yeah,
I'll be so proud if you tell me, you can always tell, like all of that.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
and that's so rare, but I think she kind of overdid it. So, I really just recommend maybe checking in like once a week and saying, it's just very like basically, did anybody break your body safety rules?
yeah.
And then another thing I did with my kids that like works like a charm, especially when the kids are like 6 or 7, is I will, like, how was your day? And they usually don't say much, but then I say, so did anybody get in trouble at school today? And then
Mhm.
just that one is like, blah, 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 blah. Well, Tommy touched Susie's butt and then she got in trouble, blah, 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 blah. Like that one just like opens up the floodgates of chat. Like, did
Okay.
anybody get in trouble? That's a good one. But I think checking in once a week is absolutely reasonable. What was the best part of your day? Did you have a tough part of your day? If you make it like
Yeah.
more generic and then throw in a specific question, here and there, that's good. When I was writing this book, I interviewed a survivor. It's probably more towards the end of the book. And his name was, or their name was Thomas. And they said that they went from being like the child that was super quiet, to a child who was fighting and getting sent to the principal's office all the time. And they were being abused by like an uncle, I
Mhm.
think. And
Mhm.
nowhere along the lines of any adult did any teacher or any adult friend or any coach, nobody asked him, are you okay? Is anybody hurting you? And they told me that if somebody would have asked that, they would have told, but nobody
Interesting.
asked. So I think it is important to like ask
Yeah.
those questions.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And what about Kim, what about hugging, right? Different cultures do it differently. I grew up in
Yeah.
India. Nobody really hugs. I mean, maybe they do now, I left India a long time back, but growing
Yeah.
up, hugging wasn't really part of the culture, part of the family,
Yeah.
But in the US, you're hugging people all the time. You're hugging strangers, for God's sake,
Yeah.
so how
That's
how do we determine, what's happening, what's safe, what's
yeah.
unsafe, what's too much, or what's acceptable?
Right.
It's
That's a good
very tricky, I
question.
think.
Yeah, I'm actually writing another book on that called I Said No to Hugs. So,
Okay.
yeah, but like that, so that's really a good question. And, ask your child what their comfort level is and if they want to hug. And just model consent at home and see how they feel about it. But my kids, for instance, are huggers, but they couldn't
Yeah.
stand when like family members that they didn't see very often came up and just hugged them without asking.
Okay.
Especially one particular family member who, there wasn't anything deviant about her. She just smelled bad and they didn't like her hugs. Like it was like a
Okay.
bad odor and they were like, nah. So I had to intervene and say, you know what, my son, he doesn't like hugs. He's just gonna fist bump you or he's gonna high five you. We're trying to teach him to be the boss of his body and speak up for himself. So he's just not gonna hug you today. Just kind of sometimes have to teach the adults about it as
Yeah.
well, because you don't want to ever force your child to hug anybody. That is just the wrong message because they have to be able to know that they can say no to adults, especially when it concerns their body rights. So
Yeah.
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 So that book is much needed too. There's the book I'm writing is about inspired by my niece who she hated hugs and all of the aunts and uncles would always try and hug her and she would like run away, say no, like she
Yeah.
had all these diversions to like get away from hugs until finally she just felt comfortable enough and asked for a hug and it's a happy ending but we had to just let her be at her own pace because it was really bothering her that people just kept trying to hug her and
Yeah.
chasing her for hugs.
It can also be a child that's sensitive to touch, like when you're
Yes,
a certain child,
exactly.
then they just don't want to be touched.
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
completely acceptable, right? If that's what they want.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
not
So
want.
that's another good topic to talk about, especially at age 7, you know. How do you feel about hugs? Do you like hugs? Do you want people to hug you? What are some other things people could do instead of hug you? You know, come up with a high five or a fist bump or some other
Yeah.
system. Happy dance, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh, those are really good questions. You know, it's awesome because you're asking great questions and there's only one person to to worry about it here. So this is perfect. Um, and I'm probably going to, if you have any other questions, you can email me them. And you know, if you
Okay.
have any questions ahead of time, if you're coming next week,
Okay.
and I will try to straighten this out so that it's easier next time. And I will you're here so you don't need the recording, but if you do want the recording, I'll let you know where it is and I can email you one as well.
Okay. That sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Well, I look forward to chatting about the book and I hope this was helpful.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And once I get these new books published, I'll let you know that there's some really great resources coming out soon.
Perfect. Thank
So
you,
that is
Kim.
good. All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming. Bye.